Welcome to this tutorial for the default 737 MAX in Flight Sim 2024. This flight's from a runway start with engines on. First of all, let's take a look at our route in the world map. So today we are flying from Stansted, runway 04 to Glasgow, runway 05. If we open up the EFB, I'm going to set our cruising altitude to 26,000 feet. We already have a departure recommended by the sim. I'm going to click Find Route to grab some intermediate waypoints. And we can see the sim has also recommended an arrival and approach for us. And finally, we want to hit Send Route to Avionics. I'm also going to set our flight type to IFR. And returning to the flight planning screen, I'm going to file the flight plan with the simulator's ATC. Okay, first of all, we're going to head down to the FMC, and if we click to the legs page, we'll see that the flight plan we planned in the world map has pulled through to the plane. We've just got to clear out this discontinuity here, so we'll grab the waypoint after the discon, populate the waypoint before, and hit execute. We're now going to head over to the initialize page and fill in some of our performance stuff. First, we're cruising at 26,000 feet, we'll execute that. We're now going to open up the generic EFB from the top menu, so that's the icon but looks like a PDA. Clicking through to the fuel page, we'll see on there it lists our reserve fuel, so that's £6. We're going to enter 6 into the FMC, we'll put in a cost index of 100. Although zero fuel weight is available on the EFB, entry seems to be bugged for now, so we're going to move straight on to flaps and V-speeds. We'll set flaps 5 both in the FMC and in the airplane on the pedestal here. Returning to the FMC, we can auto-populate our CG. That's done by clicking the soft key next to CG and then clicking it again. As for V-speeds, when they're working, you should be able to access that in Aircraft Flight Performance Environment by entering your departure runway and flap setting. However, this seems to currently be bugged, so in a minute we're just going to enter kind of generic V-speeds. Let's now enter some generic V-speeds for the 737, so we're going to enter a V1 of 130, a rotate speed of 135, and a V2 of 140. Now heading up to the autopilot panel, I'm going to arm the auto throttle and heading across to the altitude selector, going to dial in our cruising altitude of 26,000 feet. Please forgive some of the blurry textures you're seeing at the moment, it still isn't streaming stuff in properly. We'll now activate LNAV and VNAV. The enunciators aren't very clear, but you should be able to see that they are actually lit. Also going to activate the pilot not flying's flight director, so that is the switch just here. Now on the speed selector, dial in our V2 speed plus 10, so in our case that is 150 knots because our V2 was 140. We're now going to dial in our destination ILS, so on the pedestal use the arrows until the bottom screen is showing ILS. If entry isn't working, so you don't see the numbers changing on the lower screen, you may have to just toggle between the active and standby frequencies. And now we can dial in the frequency of our destination ILS, and we'll hit the double arrow to make that the active frequency. It'll appear on the screen at the top. If you want to know how to find this, check out the FAQ video on my channel homepage. And now just repeat this process on the pilot not flying side. I'm now going to dial in the course of our destination runway. Again, if you want to know how to find this, please check out the FAQ video on my channel homepage. We're going to do this on both the pilot flying and pilot not flying side. It's now time for takeoff, so let's take that parking brake off and throttles to full. Again, I apologise for the crappy quality of the textures and all this extra UI stuff. I have switched it off, but for some reason it's just completely ignoring my settings, so we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. Okay, so as we reach our rotate speed, I'm going to pull back on the yoke, and when you have positive rate, you can bring the landing gear up. Above 400 feet, you can activate the autopilot. The airplane will now start to follow your vertical and lateral flight plan. And hopefully by the time you watch this, the engine sounds will be working too. Now, as the airspeed passes the green flap markers on the PFD speed tape, you can retract the flaps. So you can see here, as the speed is crossing the flaps up marker, I'm retracting the flaps completely. As we fly, I'm just going to increase the navigation display range so we can see our flight plan a little further ahead. As you can see, it's looking good. You may notice at some points during your climb, the airplane will level off. This is perfectly normal, it's just obeying an altitude restriction in the flight plan. And as soon as it passes that restriction, it will automatically resume its climb to your cruising altitude following the VNAV path. So now there is nothing for you to do as the pilot before we reach our cruising altitude. When the airplane reaches its cruising altitude, you see a VNAV path annunciator and the airplane will start to level off. We're now going to look at the approach page of the FMC. When you click Init Ref, the approach ref page should appear. If it doesn't, just hit Index and then Approach. Popping up the EFB once more, we can see our estimated landing weight. So we're going to enter that as our gross weight in the approach page. That generates approach speeds. I'm going to click the soft key next to full flaps and insert that in the flap speed section. ILS frequency and course for our destination should also be automatically displayed. At cruise on the autopilot panel, we're going to dial in our bottom of descent altitude. We won't click it or activate it, just dial it in. As a rough guide, your bottom of descent altitude is 2,000 feet above your airport elevation at your destination. Glasgow is roughly at sea level, so we're going to enter 2,000 feet as our bottom of descent altitude. Some other preparations we can do is to set the spoilers to the armed detent and set the auto brake ready for our landing. It's possible that automatic descent at top of descent will be working in a few months, but right now it isn't. So you should descend when the simulator's ATC tells you to currently. When it's time to descend, hit VNAV, next page, descend now, execute. The airplane should now start its managed descent and idle the throttle. Note that the airplane will briefly level off around 10,000 feet to slow down, but then it will continue its descent. As you get closer to your destination airport, the airplane will want to decelerate. This is signified by low speeds displayed above the PFD speed tape. At this point, you can start applying flaps. The airplane will continue to decelerate, and as your airspeed decreases, you can continue to apply flaps in line with the flap speeds printed on the bulkhead until you are at full flaps and at your approach speed. During this process, you can also drop the landing gear. At this point, you should be full flaps, gear down and relatively close to your airport. Just before the airplane makes its turn onto final, we'll want to activate localizer mode. And when the airplane captures the localizer, you'll see a localizer annunciator on the PFD. You can now activate approach mode. Shortly afterwards, the airplane should capture the glide slope. A glide slope annunciator will appear. By default, both autopilots are armed. When the autoland function works, this will automatically enable autoland. And that's it. We're all now configured for our final approach and landing. If autoland is working by the time you watch this, great. If it isn't, just disengage the autopilot, idle the throttle and land the airplane as normal. Apply reversers on touchdown and roll them off about 80 knots. Auto brakes will take care of the rest. Again, apologies for the crappy textures here. The sim is in a really bad state right now, as you can see from the fact we've just been yeeted off the runway by a dodgy terrain mesh. Anyway, that concludes the full flight tutorial for the 737 MAX in MSFS 24. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please drop a like. Feel free to subscribe for regular sim content. Take care, and I'll see you next time.